They thought you were finished. They watched that situation unfold, messy, chaotic, unjust, and waited for your breakdown. They whispered, "Let's see how they handle this." But chosen one, you didn't just handle it, you transformed it. While others lost their composure, you stood rooted in Allah. While they shouted, accused, and slandered, you moved with a calm they couldn't understand because it wasn't from you, it was from above. You didn't fight fire with fire. You walked through it like Prophet Ibrahim, peace be upon him, untouched, because your Lord made the flames cool and peaceful. And now, the very people who judged you are second-guessing everything. The one who laughed is now silent, and someone is switching sides. Because the truth can't stay hidden when it walks with the one Allah has chosen. In this video, we're uncovering 7 powerful soul-awakening lessons from Islam about how chosen ones handle messy situations with divine strength, and why your patience just changed someone's destiny. Let's begin. Lesson 1. You let Allah speak through your silence. In the midst of chaos, when tongues were sharp and egos were louder than reason, you chose silence not out of weakness, but out of strength that only comes from deep spiritual alignment. You didn't react to the lies, the blame, or the unfair treatment. And that silence, it echoed louder than their accusations. Because when a heart is anchored in tawakkul, it no longer seeks validation from people, it waits for Allah's justice. The Prophet Yusuf, peace be upon him, remained silent when wrongfully imprisoned, and yet Allah turned the entire nation toward him in time. You followed that same blueprint. You let Allah write your defense, while others scribbled in haste. You understood the divine principle in Surah An-Nahl 16:126. But if you endure patiently, verily, it is better for those who are patient. You endured, and your patience became the most powerful argument in your favor. Because your silence wasn't empty, it was full of du'a, full of trust, full of divine restraint. And now the ones who thought you'd break are confused, because you didn't just survive, you emerged, respected. You let your character speak while their noise collapsed. You didn't feed the fire, you let it die out on its own. And that's when Allah stepped in. Hearts that once entertained lies are now beginning to question everything. Because truth has a way of shining quietly, and your silence became the mirror through which falsehood exposed itself. The chosen ones don't rush to prove their innocence, they let Allah turn their silence into thunder. And that's exactly what you did. Lesson 2. You proved your character, not your case. Anyone can argue. Anyone can raise their voice and throw evidence to win the crowd. But the chosen one knows that proving a case isn't always the goal, proving character is. You didn't step into the ring of drama because your heart belonged to a higher courtroom, the divine court of Allah. You knew that while people judge by what they see, Allah judges by what's hidden in the chest. So you didn't fight for the spotlight, you stood in the shadows with sincerity. And that's where your light outshone them all. While they tried to control the narrative, you let your adab speak. While they spread whispers, you stayed silent and steadfast, remembering that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was called names, slandered, and betrayed, yet his character was so radiant that even his enemies said, "We have never known him to lie." That's what you embodied. You chose akhlaq over argument. You chose dignity over damage control. And slowly, people began to feel the weight of your silence and the power of your principles. Because what touches hearts isn't always a loud defense, it's consistent integrity. You didn't seek pity or applause. You just kept doing right, even when you weren't being seen or appreciated. And now, hearts are shifting. Someone who once doubted you is starting to see they weren't trying to look good, they were being good. That's the legacy of a chosen one. You don't play by the world's rules, you hold fast to Allah's standards. And in doing so, you didn't just prove your case, you proved something far more powerful. Your character was never for show, it was sincere, steady, and sacred. Lesson 3. You maintained ikhlas when it was hardest. Ikhlas, sincerity, is not just a word in the vocabulary of the believer. It is the unseen light that guides the soul, especially when the world turns dark. And, chosen one, you were thrown into a situation so messy, so twisted with betrayal and confusion, that even the strongest would have crumbled or started performing for public sympathy. But not you. You didn't do what you did to look good. You didn't handle things with dignity so that people would clap. You didn't hold your tongue for the sake of optics. You did it for Allah, and only Allah. Even when no one saw your restraint, even when your patience was mistaken for guilt, even when people whispered behind your back and misread your silence as weakness, you went into sujood and whispered, Ya Allah, keep me sincere. And that dua, that moment of rawness between you and your Rabb, is what elevated you, because sincerity doesn't shine when life is easy. It reveals itself when your heart is burning and you still choose to do what pleases Allah, not what soothes your ego. You could have exposed people. You could have argued and made your side look clean. You could have posted cryptic responses, defended your name, and tried to win the narrative. But you didn't. You bowed to a higher judge. You whispered, Hasbi Allahu wa ni'mal wakil. Allah is sufficient for me, and He is the best disposer of affairs. And that wasn't just a statement, it was a declaration of loyalty. You chose ikhlas when it was the most difficult thing to choose. And that decision wasn't small, because in that moment, you were not just being watched by people, you were being watched by the angels, by the heavens, and by the most merciful. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, once said, Actions are but by intentions, and every man shall have only that which he intended. And your intention, hidden from the eyes of the world, was shining in the heavens. You didn't do it for justice in the eyes of people. You did it to keep your soul clean before your Lord. You wanted to be written among those whose actions are for His sake alone, not to gain loyalty, sympathy, or power, but to remain true to your covenant with Him. And what happened? That very sincerity that no one saw is now radiating through you. People are feeling it. They're sensing the peace around you, the light in your presence, the weight of your calm. It wasn't because you fought harder, it was because you submitted deeper. And now, someone's switching sides. Not because you campaigned for yourself, but because your ikhlas made them see what fake loyalty could never offer. Truth that doesn't sell itself. This is why the chosen ones are elevated in secrecy long before they're recognized in public. Because when others perform, you purify. When others react, you retreat into dubra. When others fight for validation, you fast for clarity. Your sincerity was your secret weapon. And Allah saw every tear you held back, every urge to respond you swallowed, every injustice you buried in prayer instead of revenge. That's why your steps are now guarded by barakah. That's why your enemies are confused. That's why someone who once sided against you is now watching you in silence, heart trembling, wondering how you managed to carry such honor in the storm. The truth is, you didn't. Allah carried you because you chose Him when it was hardest, and He never abandons those who are sincere. Lesson 4. You let the fire purify you, not burn you. There are two types of people who walk into the fire: those who are consumed by it, and those who are cleansed by it. Chosen one, you were thrown into the fire of rumors, betrayal, tension, injustice, and emotional war. The kind of fire that was designed to destroy reputations, burn bridges, and leave you hollow. But you emerged not as ash, you emerged as gold. Because you didn't let the fire burn your faith, you let it purify your soul. You understood that hardship isn't always a punishment. Sometimes it's Allah's divine furnace, not to destroy you, but to refine you. The Prophet Ibrahim, peace be upon him, was thrown into a fire so real and so dangerous that all assumed he'd be consumed. But Allah told the fire, "O fire, be coolness and peace upon Ibrahim." Surah Al-Anbiya 21:69. That's what happened to you. The situation didn't change, but Allah changed how it affected you. He made the fire a means of peace. You lost people, you lost your image, you lost control over how others saw you, but you gained something priceless, a purified heart. A heart that no longer needs the approval of creation because it found peace with the Creator. A heart that doesn't cling to false loyalty, fake praise, or superficial applause. You came out of that fire cleaner, lighter, and stronger. That's the beauty of divine hardship. It strips away everything you never needed. You no longer had the strength to carry egos, defend yourself, or force people to stay. And in that helplessness, you found power, because in the flames, you surrendered. You cried, not out of defeat, but out of purification. You looked at what was happening and said, "Ya Allah, burn away what isn't for me. Purify me until all that's left is what you love." That dubra is why you walked out stronger. And now, they're confused. They expected bitterness, vengeance, or at least some visible cracks in your spirit, but instead, you're glowing. The fire didn't break you, it revealed you. They threw you in thinking it would be the end, but it was your beginning, because what they intended for harm, Allah used for purification, and people can feel it. That's why someone is quietly switching sides. They saw you lose everything and still walk with light. They watched you endure the heat without cursing anyone, without losing your dignity, without compromising your faith. That type of strength doesn't come from within, it comes from above. And it leaves people shaken. You see, the chosen ones don't avoid pain, they walk through it with intention. They don't curse the fire, they use it to burn off their nafs. And they don't fear being alone, because the fire becomes their private sanctuary with Allah. You went in raw, wounded, unsure of what would happen, but you came out transformed, more honest, more surrendered, more pure. Because Allah doesn't waste the fire, He uses it to write your next chapter in ink that only the purified can understand. And now, you're walking into rooms where the same people who plotted against you can't meet your eyes. Not because you hurt them, but because your purification exposed their filth. You became living proof that when the chosen ones walk through fire with sincerity, they don't come out damaged, they come out divinely dangerous. Lesson 5. You exposed the truth without saying a word. You didn't utter a single accusation. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't call anyone out by name. And still, the truth came flooding out like a dam had burst. Chosen one, your silence wasn't empty, it was sacred. Because while they tried to orchestrate chaos and paint you in the wrong light, you handed the situation over to the one who never sleeps. You said nothing, and that was everything. That restraint was your proof. That stillness was your argument. While others scrambled to justify themselves, over-explaining, oversharing, and over-speaking, you stood rooted in calm because you knew a secret. When Allah takes over your defense, you no longer have to shout, your character becomes your courtroom. And one by one, without effort, the truth started surfacing. Conversations began to shift. People who once doubted you began to question the version they were told, and hearts that had turned away began to lean in, quietly, because truth doesn't need to scream, it simply waits. It was your response or lack thereof that shook them. You didn't defend yourself. You let your akhlaq defend you. You didn't engage in gossip. You engaged in dhikr. You didn't try to expose anyone. You simply exposed your own sincerity, and that was enough to reveal the contrast. The more they spoke, the more they exposed themselves. The more you stayed quiet, the more your presence unsettled them. Why? Because light makes darkness uncomfortable. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, didn't always respond to his enemies with words sometimes. He responded with unwavering grace, and in that grace, hearts turned. Just as his silence carried weight, yours carried power. You weren't trying to manipulate the story, you trusted Al-Fattah, the opener, to unfold the truth in his own time. And he did. People began to see things they weren't meant to see. False friendships began to crack. Lies began to contradict themselves. And those who rushed to judge you began to feel the discomfort of their own conscience. You didn't twist facts. You didn't need a microphone. Your truth was preserved in your saber. And that patience, that quiet endurance, became louder than any protest. The angels recorded your restraint with pride, because in the face of falsehood, you trusted the ancient wisdom of the believers. The truth stands out clear from falsehood. Surah Al-Baqarah 2, 256. And now, someone who once sided against you is silent, not because they suddenly love you, but because they're starting to realize you weren't the liar, you were the lighthouse. You weren't the noise, you were the stillness. And in that stillness, the truth rose like the sun, undeniable and radiant. That's why hearts are switching sides. Not because you convinced them, but because Allah revealed what needed to be seen. The chosen ones don't chase vindication, they carry truth so deeply within that it reveals itself without a single word. And you, chosen one, just taught the world a lesson without speaking a sentence. Lesson 6. You became a mirror, and they didn't like what they saw. You didn't change who you were, you simply stood still in truth. And by doing that, chosen one, you became a mirror. Not the kind that flatters or distorts, but the kind that reflects the reality of the soul standing before it. You walked into that messy situation with integrity, patience, and sincerity, and it unsettled people, not because you attacked them, but because you revealed them. Without saying a word, you exposed pride, ego, envy, and deception simply by being consistent in your obedience to Allah. You didn't lower yourself to their level, and in staying elevated, they saw the contrast and it burned. Because the chosen ones don't just carry light, they reflect it. And that reflection forces people to confront parts of themselves they've been hiding, even from their own hearts. Your calm exposed their restlessness, your purity exposed their schemes, your silence highlighted their noise, and your steadfastness made their inconsistency feel shameful. That's what mirrors do. They don't attack, they reveal. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was once told, "You only bring division by the Quraysh." But the truth was, his light simply divided truth from falsehood. The problem wasn't him. The problem was the reflection his presence created in their hearts. And you too inherited that spiritual trait. You didn't push people away, your light forced them to make a choice. Either humble themselves or hate the mirror that showed them their shadows. That's why they got defensive. That's why they lashed out. That's why they tried to spin narratives and paint you as the villain, not because you were wrong, but because your righteousness made their darkness harder to ignore. You didn't accuse, but your presence testified. You didn't expose, but your behavior revealed. That's the divine irony. The more you held your peace, the more it disturbed theirs. You weren't showing off. You were just being authentic. And that authenticity, that inner ikhlas, struck their souls like lightning. But not everyone turned away. Some, who were humble enough to reflect, began to change. They began to wonder why you had peace in the storm, why you didn't collapse under pressure, why you never spoke evil despite being wronged. And in that curiosity, hearts began to soften. Someone is switching sides, not because you argued better, but because your spiritual clarity made them see better. You became a walking reminder of what they were trying to suppress. That truth doesn't beg to be believed, it simply reflects what's real. So don't be shocked when your presence stirs discomfort. It's not that you're the problem, it's that you've become a divine mirror. And when people aren't ready to see themselves, they'll try to shatter you first. But stay firm, because the mirror that reflects truth with grace is never forgotten. And one day, even the ones who couldn't bear their reflection will thank you for showing them who they really were and who they could still become. Lesson 7. You walked away, and that was your loudest victory. There comes a moment in the life of the chosen one when you don't win by fighting, you win by walking away. And when you did, chosen one, the earth itself witnessed your victory. You weren't retreating. You weren't giving up. You were rising above what no longer deserved your energy, your presence, or your light. They expected you to stay and plead your case. They thought you'd cling, beg, or break. But you turned your back on the noise with your head held high, not out of pride, but out of submission to something greater. That walk-away moment, quiet and graceful, carried more power than any argument could, because in that step you told the world, my worth isn't tied to chaos. My honor doesn't need to be proven. My peace comes from Allah, not from being understood. You walked away, and that was the moment you won. What they didn't expect is that your silence in departure would echo louder than their screams. That your absence would speak volumes. That the space you once filled with sincerity, with calm, with truth, would become a vacuum impossible to replace. And suddenly, the ones who dismissed you noticed the emptiness you left behind. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, walked away from Taif, wounded and rejected, and it seemed like a moment of loss. But in reality, it was the beginning of the victory of Islam. Because when you walk away with your dignity intact, you invite divine help. You didn't stay to win their favor, you left to preserve your soul. And now, the ones who thought they had control are left stunned by how peacefully you exited their battlefield. You didn't announce your departure with drama or bitterness, you simply disengaged. And that shook them, because walking away doesn't mean weakness, it means wisdom. You chose to protect your heart instead of proving your worth. You left the battlefield knowing that Allah is Al-Wakil, the ultimate trustee. And what came next? Peace, growth, healing. While they remained trapped in circles of blame, you ascended into a space of clarity and barakah. And that movement upward, not outward, became your loudest proclamation. I don't need this, I have Allah. And now, the same people who questioned your strength are sitting in silence, wondering how you never lost your balance. Someone is switching sides, not because you tried to convince them, but because your exit showed them the truth. The one who walks away with grace is the one who was right all along. The way you didn't curse, didn't argue, didn't announce revenge, it all left them bewildered. Because what you left behind wasn't just a situation. You left behind a reminder of what true strength looks like, a reminder of what spiritual royalty carries, And most importantly, a reminder that those chosen by Allah don't need to win battles. They walk away and let Allah crown them in private. You, chosen one, walked away, and in doing so, you wrote a silent legacy. One that even your enemies can't ignore. One that made hearts tremble. One that made someone whisper behind closed doors, "I think we misunderstood them." And now, as you continue your journey, don't look back. Because when Allah elevates you through your walkaway, the path behind you will only remind people of who you were and who they lost. That's your loudest victory. And it didn't require a single word. Conclusion. You didn't just survive that messy situation, you elevated through it. You proved that the chosen ones don't need crowds to validate them. They need only Allah. You let the drama pass like wind and stayed grounded in dhikr. You let the fire purify, not destroy. And now, hearts are shifting. Someone who judged you is now reflecting. Someone who doubted you is now praying to become more like you. That's the power of divine adab. That's the beauty of prophetic strength. That's the mark of being chosen. So if you're watching this, remember, they didn't break you, they confirmed you. And now the world sees it too. Like, share, and subscribe to Wisdom of the Prophets, where truth is spoken with dignity, and every soul is reminded of its divine worth. Until next time, stay silent, stay pure, and let Allah do the talking.